Princess Isabella had always hated the fancy clothes and formal dinners that came with being royal. At 28, she was tired of smiling for cameras and shaking hands with people who only cared about her title. That rainy Tuesday morning, she was supposed to visit a small village that had been hit by terrible floods. The plan was simple: arrive in the royal car, give a speech, hand out some supplies, and leave within 2 hours. But nature had different plans. The flooding was much worse than anyone had expected. Entire families were stuck on their rooftops, waiting for help. Isabella watched from her car window as rescue boats struggled to reach everyone. She saw an old woman crying as she held a photo of her missing cat. She saw children shivering in the cold rain with nowhere to go. Something inside Isabella broke. She couldn't just stand there and wave anymore. "Stop the car," she told her driver. Her security chief, Captain Rodriguez, immediately shook his head. "Your Highness, it's not safe. The water levels are rising, and we have strict orders to keep you secure." Isabella was already taking off her expensive heels. "Then you can follow me on foot. I'm going to help these people." Before anyone could stop her, she jumped out of the car and ran toward a group of villagers who were trying to save furniture from a flooded house. She grabbed one end of a heavy sofa and helped carry it to higher ground. Her beautiful dress got soaked and muddy within minutes, but she didn't care. The villagers were shocked to see their princess working alongside them. Soon she was helping elderly people climb into rescue boats and carrying crying babies to safety. Hours passed without her noticing. The royal schedule was completely forgotten. During all this chaos, Isabella became separated from her security team. She was helping a family move their belongings when she realized she couldn't see Captain Rodriguez or any of her guards anywhere. The rain was getting heavier, and she was completely lost in the narrow village streets. Shivering and exhausted, she spotted a small cafe that was still open. The sign said, "Maria's Kitchen," in faded letters. Isabella pushed open the door, grateful for any shelter from the storm. Inside, she found a man sitting alone at a corner table. He was covered in mud from head to toe, his dark hair messy and wet. He was eating what looked like simple bread and soup while writing notes in a small notebook. He looked up when she entered, and Isabella noticed his kind brown eyes and tired, but gentle smile. "Are you okay?" he asked, immediately standing up. "You look freezing." Isabella realized how she must look. Soaking wet, covered in mud, her once elegant dress now looking like old rags. Without her usual makeup and fancy clothes, she was just another flood victim seeking shelter. "I'm fine," she said, though her teeth were chattering. "Just got caught in the storm while helping with the rescue efforts." The man quickly took off his jacket and offered it to her. "Here, take this. You'll catch pneumonia if you stay in those wet clothes." Isabella was surprised by his kindness. In her royal world, people usually waited for permission before offering help. This stranger just saw someone in need and acted immediately. "Thank you," she said, wrapping the warm jacket around her shoulders. "I'm Isabella." "I'm David," he replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Please, sit down. Maria makes the best soup in the village. It'll warm you up." David called out to the elderly woman behind the counter. "Maria, can we get another bowl of your magic soup over here? This lady needs it more than I do." As they waited for the food, David and Isabella started talking. He told her he was a humanitarian aid worker from Canada, part of a team that responded to natural disasters around the world. He had been in the village for 3 days, helping coordinate rescue efforts and setting up temporary shelters. "This flood is one of the worst I've seen in Europe," David said, stirring his soup thoughtfully. "The water came so fast that people barely had time to grab their most important belongings. But you know what amazes me? The way everyone is helping each other, rich or poor, young or old. When disaster strikes, people show their true nature." Isabella found herself hanging on his every word. David spoke about the families he had helped, the volunteers who worked through the night, and the small acts of kindness he witnessed every day. He didn't talk about politics or money or fame. He talked about real people and real problems and real solutions. "What about you?" David asked, taking a bite of bread. "Are you from around here? You seem to know your way around disaster relief pretty well." Isabella hesitated for a moment. In her normal life, this would be the part where she had to explain her royal status, watch the person's entire attitude change, and then deal with either excessive flattery or nervous formality. But sitting in this small cafe, wearing David's jacket and sharing simple food, she felt more like herself than she had in years. "I work with various charities," she said, which was true enough. "I try to help where I can, but today was different, more intense than usual." David nodded understandingly. "Sometimes you plan to help from a distance and then you see the reality up close. It changes you, doesn't it? Makes you realize that real help means getting your hands dirty." They talked for over 2 hours. David told her about growing up in a small Canadian town, his decision to study international development, and his dream of starting a foundation that would focus on preventing disasters rather than just responding to them. Isabella found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. Her love of reading, her frustration with meaningless social events, and her secret wish to make a real difference in the world. "You know what I love about this work?" David said, his eyes lighting up. "Every person you help is someone's whole world. That old woman we helped onto the rescue boat, she might be someone's only grandmother. That little boy we carried to safety, he might grow up to cure cancer or write beautiful music. You never know whose life you're changing." Isabella felt her heart skip. Here was someone who understood what she had always felt but could never express. That every single person mattered. That helping others wasn't just duty, but joy. The conversation was interrupted by loud voices outside. Captain Rodriguez burst through the cafe door, looking panicked and relieved at the same time. "Your High, Isabella!" He caught himself just in time. "We've been searching everywhere for you. The car is ready and we need to leave immediately." David looked confused. By the formal way, the security officer spoke to Isabella, but he didn't ask questions. He simply stood up and helped Isabella out of his jacket. "Thank you for the soup and the company," Isabella said, not wanting this magical afternoon to end. "I hope your relief work goes well." "Thank you for your help today," David replied. "The village is lucky to have volunteers like you." As Isabella walked toward the door with her security team, she turned back one more time. David was already back to his notebook, planning tomorrow's rescue operations. He had no idea that he had just spent the afternoon with a princess, and somehow that made their conversation even more precious to her. During the long ride back to the palace, Isabella stared out the window at the flooded countryside. For the first time in her adult life, she had met someone who saw her as just Isabella. Not Princess Isabella, not a royal duty, not a photo opportunity. Just a woman who cared about helping others. She had no idea if she would ever see David again, but she knew that something fundamental had changed inside her that rainy afternoon in Maria's kitchen. She had tasted what it felt like to be truly seen and valued for who she was, not what she represented, and she wanted more of that feeling. 3 weeks had passed since the flood, but Isabella couldn't stop thinking about David. She found herself staring out of palace windows, remembering their conversation in Maria's kitchen. Every royal dinner felt more boring than before. Every formal speech felt more meaningless. She kept thinking about what David had said, that real help meant getting your hands dirty. So Isabella made a decision that shocked everyone around her. "I want to increase my charity work," she announced to her assistant Sophia during their morning meeting. "Real work. Not just cutting ribbons and posing for photos." Sophia, who had been Isabella's closest friend since childhood, raised her eyebrows. "What kind of real work are you talking about?" "Hands-on volunteering, building houses, teaching children, helping at refugee centers, the kind of work that actually makes a difference. The palace staff thought it was just a phase." Isabella had tried new hobbies before, painting, horseback riding, learning different languages, But this felt different. Isabella wasn't just interested in charity work, she was desperate for it. She started volunteering at a refugee center in the capital city, about an hour's drive from the palace. The first day, she wore simple jeans and a plain sweater, tied her hair back in a ponytail, and introduced herself to the coordinator as Bella, a philanthropist who preferred working directly with people rather than just donating money. The story wasn't entirely false. Isabella did come from wealth, and she had always preferred action over paperwork. She just left out the part about being third in line to the throne. For 2 months, Isabella spent every free day at the center. She taught English to Syrian families, helped sort donated clothes, and played with children who had lost their homes. The work was hard and sometimes heartbreaking, but it filled a hole in her soul that she hadn't even realized was there. Then, on a Tuesday morning in November, she saw him. David was crouched down next to a little girl who was crying. He was showing her how to make paper airplanes, speaking to her in broken Arabic mixed with gentle English. The child's face lit up as her airplane soared across the room. Isabella's heart started beating faster. She had hoped to see him again, but hadn't expected it to actually happen. "Bella!" David looked up and smiled when he noticed her. "What are you doing here?" "I volunteer here twice a week," Isabella said, trying to sound casual while her pulse raced. "What about you?" "My organization partnered with this center to help with integration programs," David explained, standing up and brushing dust off his knees. "We're teaching job skills and helping families navigate the legal system. It's complicated work, but these people deserve better than just surviving." They fell into working together naturally. David was building furniture for new apartment setups, and Isabella helped by painting and organizing. They worked side by side, talking about everything and nothing. Books they had read, places they wanted to travel, funny stories from their childhood. Isabella learned that David had grown up in a small town where his parents ran a bakery. He had worked there every summer, learning that honest work with your hands was something to be proud of. She told him about her love of ancient history and her dream of seeing the ruins in Jordan, carefully avoiding any mention of the state visits she had already made there. "You know a lot about international politics for someone in philanthropy," David observed one day as they painted chairs for a family's new apartment. Isabella's heart skipped. "I read a lot of news, and I studied political science in university." "Where did you go to school?" David asked. "Oxford," Isabella answered honestly, then quickly added, "on scholarship." It wasn't technically a lie. The royal family did pay for her education, which could be considered a kind of scholarship. David nodded approvingly. "That explains why you speak 4 languages and know so much about European refugee policies." Their friendship deepened over the following months. David would text her about funny things that happened at work, and Isabella found herself smiling at her phone during boring royal meetings. They started grabbing coffee after their volunteer shifts, sitting in small cafes where no one would think to look for a princess. Isabella had never felt so comfortable with anyone. David treated her like an equal, challenged her ideas, and made her laugh until her stomach hurt. He told her about his ex-girlfriend who had left him for someone with more money, and Isabella shared carefully edited stories about past relationships that had failed because the men only cared about her status. "I hate when people pretend to like you for the wrong reasons," Isabella said one evening as they walked through a quiet park after volunteering. "What do you mean?" David asked. "You know, when they're more interested in what you can do for them than who you actually are. When they see your background or your family's money and suddenly they're your best friend." David nodded seriously. "I've seen that happen to people I know. It must be lonely, never knowing if someone likes the real you or just what you represent." Isabella felt tears in her eyes. He understood perfectly, without even knowing the full extent of her situation. Winter turned into spring, and their relationship grew stronger. David started bringing her favorite coffee without being asked. Isabella memorized his schedule so she could volunteer on the same days he worked. They developed inside jokes and could communicate with just a look across a crowded room. Sophia began to notice the change in Isabella. "You're different lately," she said one day while helping Isabella choose an outfit for a state dinner. "Happier, like you have a secret." Isabella did have a secret, and it was getting harder to keep. She was falling in love with David, but she was living a lie every single day. Every time he praised her kindness or intelligence, she felt guilty knowing he didn't have the complete picture. Every time they talked about honesty and authenticity, she felt like a fraud. The worst part was that David was falling in love with her too. She could see it in the way he looked at her, the way he saved funny stories to tell her later, the way he had started calling her his favorite volunteer partner. One evening in May, they were walking along the river after helping a family move into their new apartment. The sunset painted the water golden, and David stopped walking. "Bella," he said, turning to face her, "I need to tell you something." Isabella's heart stopped. Did he know? Had someone recognized her? "I know we agreed to keep things as friendship," David continued, "but I can't pretend anymore. I'm falling in love with you." The words she had been hoping to hear for months finally came. But instead of joy, Isabella felt panic. She was living a double life, lying to the man she loved about who she really was. How could she say she loved him too when their entire relationship was built on her deception? "David, she started but couldn't finish. "You don't have to say anything now," David said gently, misunderstanding her hesitation. "I just wanted you to know how I feel. Whatever happens next, I'm grateful for every moment we've spent together." That night, Isabella lay awake in her palace bedroom, staring at the ceiling. She was in love with a man who knew her as Bella the philanthropist, not Princess Isabella. She had created the exact problem she had always tried to avoid. Someone who loved her for who she appeared to be, not who she really was. But this time, the deception was her own choice, and she had no idea how to fix it without losing the best thing that had ever happened to her. The clock on her nightstand ticked past midnight, marking another day of living in two worlds. The world where she was a princess with endless responsibilities, and the world where she was just Bella, the woman who had found her soulmate in the most unexpected place. She knew this couldn't continue forever, but she wasn't ready to give up either world just yet. 2 months had passed since David confessed his feelings by the river. Isabella had told him she loved him too, but every day the weight of her secret grew heavier. They were now officially together, stealing moments between her royal duties and his humanitarian work. Their relationship had become a beautiful dance of hidden meetings and careful planning. David had no idea that the woman he loved disappeared for days at a time to attend state dinners and diplomatic meetings. He thought Bella was just a very dedicated philanthropist who sometimes had to travel for her family's business. Isabella hated lying to him, but she was terrified of losing what they had built together. Everything changed on a sunny Wednesday morning in July. David had been planning something special for weeks. He had saved up money from his modest salary and had been secretly researching engagement rings. He wanted to propose to Bella, but he wanted to do it right. He had noticed she always wore a vintage gold watch that she said belonged to her grandmother, and he thought a vintage-style ring would match perfectly. So David spent his lunch break at a small jewelry shop in the old part of town, looking at antique rings and trying to imagine which one Bella would love most. "I'm looking for something classic but not too fancy," he told the elderly jeweler. "My girlfriend has simple taste, but she appreciates quality and history." The jeweler showed him several beautiful options, and David finally chose a delicate ring with a small diamond surrounded by tiny emeralds. It reminded him of Bella's eyes, bright and full of life. "She's a lucky woman," the jeweler said as he wrapped the ring in a small velvet box. David smiled. "I'm the lucky one." That evening, David went home to his small apartment and opened his laptop to research proposal ideas. He wanted to make the moment perfect for Bella. Maybe he could propose at the refugee center where they first reconnected, or by the river where they had their first real conversation about love. As he browsed through romantic ideas online, an advertisement popped up on his screen. It was for luxury watches, and one of them looked exactly like the one Bella always wore. Curious, David clicked on the link to see how much such a watch might cost. The website showed him expensive designer watches, but none of them matched Bella's exactly. David decided to search more specifically, typing in vintage gold women's watch antique into the search engine. The first result that came up wasn't about watches for sale. It was a news article from the royal family's official website, dated just 3 days ago. The headline read, "Princess Isabella visits Children's Hospital in royal engagement." David almost scrolled past it, but something made him stop. In the large photo accompanying the article, he saw a familiar face. A young woman in an elegant blue dress was reading to sick children, and on her wrist was the exact same vintage watch that Bella wore every single day. The woman in the photo was unmistakably Bella. Same smile, same kind eyes, same gentle way of holding children. But the caption under the photo read, "Her Royal Highness Princess Isabella charmed young patients during her visit yesterday." David stared at the screen for a full minute, not believing what he was seeing. Then he scrolled down and found more photos. Bella, his Bella, wearing a tiara and shaking hands with important-looking people. Bella in a formal gown at what looked like a state dinner. Bella waving from the balcony of a palace. With shaking hands, David searched for Princess Isabella and found hundreds of photos and articles. There she was at charity galas, diplomatic meetings, and royal ceremonies. Always elegant, always smiling, always wearing that same vintage watch that she had told him was her grandmother's. He found her official biography, Princess Isabella, 28 years old, third in line to the throne, known for her charity, work, and fluent in 5 languages. Educated at Oxford University, unmarried. David felt like the world was spinning around him. Everything made sense now. Her knowledge of international politics, her perfect manners, the way she sometimes seemed to know things about foreign countries that she claimed she had only read about. The mysterious family business trips, the expensive clothes she tried to hide under casual sweaters. The woman he loved, the woman he had been planning to propose to, was a princess. And she had been lying to him for over a year. David closed his laptop and sat in his dark apartment, trying to process what he had discovered. He felt angry, betrayed, and confused all at the same time. Had anything about their relationship been real? Did she actually love him, or was this all some kind of game for her? He thought about all the times she had talked about hating fake people who only cared about money and status. All the times she had praised him for being honest and genuine. All the times she had said she valued authenticity above everything else. The irony was crushing. David didn't sleep that night. He kept looking at the engagement ring sitting on his bedside table and wondering what to do. Part of him wanted to throw it away. Part of him wanted to confront Bella immediately. Part of him wanted to pretend he had never seen those photos, but the biggest part of him just felt heartbroken. The next morning, Bella texted him as usual. "Good morning, love. Can't wait to see you at the center today. We're helping the Rodriguez family move into their new place. Remember?" David stared at the message for 10 minutes before responding. "We need to talk. Can you meet me at our usual coffee shop instead?" "Of course. Is everything okay?" "I'll explain when I see you." An hour later, David sat in the small cafe where they had shared so many happy conversations. When Bella walked in wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt looking exactly like the woman he had fallen in love with, his heart broke all over again. "David, you look terrible," she said, sitting down across from him. "What's wrong?" David pulled out his phone and showed her the news article with her photo. "Who are you really?" The color drained from Bella's face. She looked at the screen, then at David, then down at her hands. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I can explain," she finally whispered. "Can you?" David asked, his voice colder than she had ever heard it. "Because I've been trying all night to understand how the woman I love could lie to me about something this big. I've been trying to figure out what else you've lied about." Tears started flowing down Isabella's cheeks. "Everything else was true. My feelings for you. Everything I told you about wanting to help people. Everything about who I am inside. That was all real. But your name isn't Bella. You're not just a philanthropist. You don't come from a normal, wealthy family. You live in a palace, Isabella. You're a princess, and I'm—" David gestured helplessly at himself. "I'm nobody." "Don't say that," Isabella said desperately. "You're everything to me. You're the most genuine, kindest, most wonderful person I've ever met." "Then why didn't you trust me with the truth?" David asked. "Did you think I would try to use you? Did you think I would suddenly become fake and greedy?" Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I was scared. Every relationship I've ever had has been ruined by my title. People either want to use me or they get intimidated and run away. When I met you, for the first time in my life, someone saw me as just a person. I was terrified that if you knew the truth, everything would change." "Everything has changed," David said quietly. "Because now, I don't know what was real and what was performance. How can I trust anything you've told me?" Isabella reached across the table to touch his hand, but David pulled away. "I need time to think," he said, standing up. "I need to figure out how I feel about all of this." "David, please," Isabella begged. "Don't give up on us. We can work through this." But David was already walking toward the door. "I don't know if we can, Isabella. I don't even know who you are anymore." Isabella sat alone in the coffee shop, watching the man she loved disappear into the crowd outside. She had always known this day might come, but she hadn't expected it to hurt this much. For the first time in her life, being a princess felt like the worst thing in the world. 8 months had passed since that terrible day in the coffee shop. 8 months of silence between Isabella and David. 8 months of heartbreak that neither of them knew how to heal. David had left for Cambodia 3 weeks after their confrontation. He couldn't bear staying in the same city where every street corner reminded him of Isabella. His organization had offered him a position leading disaster relief efforts in Southeast Asia, and he jumped at the chance to disappear into work that demanded everything from him. The refugee camps in Cambodia were overcrowded and understaffed. David threw himself into building temporary shelters, setting up medical stations, and coordinating food distribution. He worked 18-hour days, hoping that exhaustion would help him forget the woman who had broken his heart. But late at night, lying on his small cot in the volunteer dormitory, David found himself thinking about Isabella. Not Princess Isabella, from the news articles, but the woman who had cried while helping a lost child find his mother. The woman who had stayed up all night painting furniture for refugee families. The woman who had laughed so hard at his terrible jokes that she snorted, coffee through her nose. Meanwhile, back home, Isabella was struggling with her own pain. She had returned to her royal duties with renewed dedication, hoping that work would distract her from missing David. She attended every charity event, every state dinner, every ribbon-cutting ceremony that was asked of her. But her grandmother, Queen Catherine, noticed that the light had gone out of Isabella's eyes. "You're going through the motions, dear," Queen Catherine said one afternoon as they had tea in the palace garden. "Your body is here, but your heart is somewhere else." Isabella tried to smile. "I'm fine, grandmother. Just focused on my responsibilities." Queen Catherine studied her granddaughter's face. In her 85 years, she had learned to read people very well. "Who is he?" "What do you mean?" Isabella asked, but her cheeks turned red. "The man who put that sadness in your eyes. The one you're trying so hard to forget. Isabella's composure finally cracked. She told her grandmother everything, about meeting David during the flood, about their year of secret meetings, about falling in love with someone who saw her as just a person, and about how it all fell apart when he discovered the truth. Queen. Catherine listened without judgment. When Isabella finished her story, the old queen was quiet for a long moment. "Tell me about this, David," she said finally. "What kind of man is he?" Isabella's face softened as she described David's kindness, his dedication to helping others, and his honest heart. Queen Catherine quietly made some phone calls to trusted friends in the humanitarian community. What she learned impressed her. David Chen was known as one of the most ethical aid workers in his field. He had refused bribes that could have made him wealthy. He had risked his own safety countless times to help people in dangerous situations. His colleagues described him as someone who never sought recognition for his work, but always gave credit to others. "This man sounds worthy of investigation," Queen Catherine told Isabella. "Perhaps we should learn more about his character." In Cambodia, David was facing his own moment of truth. He had been working with a local aid coordinator named Chen Wei, a woman in her 50s who had grown up in poverty but managed to get a scholarship to university in America. She had returned to Cambodia to help her own people, despite having opportunities to stay in the wealthy Western world. One evening, as they were distributing meals to families in the camp, Chen Wei noticed David's distracted mood. "You carry sadness with you," she observed in her direct way. "Old sadness, not new sadness." David had learned to respect Chen Wei's wisdom over the months they had worked together. "I fell in love with someone who wasn't who I thought she was," he admitted. "Ah," Chen Wei nodded. "She lied to you about something important. She's from a very different world than mine. Wealthy, powerful family. I thought she was just a regular person who cared about helping others, but it turns out she's basically royalty." Chen Wei stopped ladling soup and looked at David seriously. "Let me tell you something. I grew up sleeping on dirt floors and eating rice once a day if we were lucky. When I got to America, some people treated me like I was stupid because of where I came from. Others treated me like I was exotic and interesting because I was poor. Both reactions were about my circumstances, not about who I was as a person." She resumed serving food as she continued. "But a few people, the good ones, they looked past where I came from and saw what I chose to do with my life. They judged me by my actions, not by my birth." David thought about her words as he continued working. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Isabella's actions during their time together. She had chosen to spend her free time helping refugees. She had chosen to get her hands dirty instead of just writing checks. She had chosen to treat everyone with equal kindness, regardless of their status. Maybe the question wasn't whether she had lied about her background. Maybe the question was whether her actions showed her true character. Thousands of miles away, Isabella was having her own revelation. She had been watching the news coverage of a massive earthquake that had struck Cambodia. The reports showed devastated communities and overwhelmed relief efforts. Isabella found herself scanning every image, desperate for any sign of David. Then, she saw him in a brief news clip, dirty, exhausted, but carefully helping an injured child onto a medical helicopter. Even in that short moment, Isabella could see the same gentleness that had made her fall in love with him. Without consulting anyone, Isabella made a decision that shocked the entire palace staff. "I'm going to Cambodia," she announced to Sophia the next morning. "What? Why?" Sophia asked, nearly dropping her coffee. "There's been an earthquake. People need help. I'm going as part of an official royal relief mission." Sophia stared at her friend. "This is about David, isn't it?" Isabella didn't deny it. "Maybe. But even if he refuses to see me, those people still need help. And I need to do something that matters." 3 days later, Isabella arrived in Cambodia with a small team of palace staff and security guards. She had insisted on staying, in the volunteer quarters, rather than a luxury hotel, much to her security team's dismay. The refugee camp was even worse than the news reports had shown. Families were living in makeshift tents. Children were crying from hunger, and medical supplies were running dangerously low. Isabella immediately rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She helped set up emergency shelters, sorted medical supplies, and spent hours comforting traumatized children. She had been working for 2 days straight when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Bella?" Isabella turned around, and there was David. He was covered in dust and looked like he hadn't slept in days, but his eyes were the same kind brown eyes she remembered. They stared at each other for a moment that felt like forever. "What are you doing here?" David asked quietly. "Helping," Isabella said simply. "Same as you." David looked around at the destroyed camp, at Isabella's mud-stained clothes and tired face. This wasn't a photo opportunity or a publicity stunt. This was real work in terrible conditions, and she had chosen to be here. "We should talk," he said finally. "Yes," Isabella agreed. "We should." That evening, they sat together on a pile of supply boxes, watching the sunset over the refugee camp. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They were both different people than they had been 8 months ago. Older, sadder, but perhaps wiser. "I'm sorry," Isabella said finally. "I should have told you the truth from the beginning." "I'm sorry, too," David replied. "I should have let you explain. I should have fought for us instead of running away." They talked through the night, sharing the pain of the past 8 months and slowly beginning to rebuild the trust that had been broken. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. As the sun rose over the camp, Isabella and David were working side by side again, helping families who had lost everything find hope for a new beginning. And maybe, just maybe, they were finding their own new beginning too. 2 months had passed since Isabella and David reunited in Cambodia. They had spent those weeks rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of complete honesty. David now knew everything about Isabella's royal life, and Isabella had learned to trust that David loved her for who she was, not what she represented. When they returned home, everything felt different. Isabella no longer had to lie about where she was going or make excuses for her absences. David had met her parents in a formal but warm dinner at the palace, where he impressed them with his genuine care for their daughter and his thoughtful questions about their humanitarian initiatives. But there was still one person Isabella was nervous about David meeting: her grandmother, Queen Catherine. Queen Catherine was the family matriarch, the woman whose approval carried more weight than anyone else's. She had ruled alongside her husband for 40 years before becoming the Queen Mother, and her wisdom guided every major family decision. If Queen Catherine didn't accept David, their relationship would face challenges that even true love might not overcome. Isabella had been putting off the formal introduction for weeks, but she couldn't avoid it forever. Queen Catherine had requested afternoon tea with Isabella's young man, and when the Queen Mother requested something, it happened. But life had its own plans. Isabella and David had been spending a quiet Sunday afternoon at the palace, walking through the private gardens and enjoying the rare peaceful moment together. David was still getting used to the grandeur of palace life, but he was learning to appreciate the simple beauty of the rose gardens and the ancient oak trees that had stood there for centuries. They had settled on a bench near the fountain where David was reading a book about sustainable development while Isabella worked on correspondence for her various charities. It was domestic and comfortable in a way that made Isabella's heart feel full. "Aunt Isabella," a small voice called out. Isabella looked up to see her 6-year-old nephew, Prince Alexander, running toward them across the lawn. Alexander was the son of Isabella's older brother, the Crown Prince, and he had always been Isabella's favorite little person in the world. "Alex, sweetheart." Isabella laughed as the little boy launched himself into her arms. "What are you doing out here? Shouldn't you be having your afternoon lessons?" Mother said I could play in the garden for an hour, Alexander said, then noticed David sitting beside Isabella. Who's that? This is David, Isabella said warmly. David, meet Prince Alexander, the most mischievous boy in the entire kingdom. David smiled and extended his hand for a formal handshake, but Alexander just stared at him with the direct curiosity that only children possess. Are you Isabella's boyfriend? Alexander asked bluntly. David glanced at Isabella, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, I am. Do you like to read stories? Alexander asked, climbing onto the bench between them. I love stories, David said. What's your favorite? Alexander immediately launched into an enthusiastic description of a book about dragons and brave knights. David listened with genuine interest, asking questions that made the little boy light up with excitement. Can you read it to me? Alexander asked, producing a well-worn picture book from his jacket pocket. Of course, David said, taking the book, and opening it to the first page. Isabella watched as David began reading in different voices for each character, making Alexander giggle with delight. David was completely natural with children, patient, playful, and kind. He didn't talk down to Alexander or try to impress him. He just treated him like a person worth listening to. They were so absorbed in the story that none of them noticed. Queen Catherine approaching across the lawn until her shadow fell across the bench. Grandmother! Isabella jumped up, suddenly nervous. Queen Catherine, elegant even in her simple afternoon dress, looked at the scene before her. Her grandson curled up against a stranger, both of them laughing at a silly story about a dragon, who was afraid of mice. Don't stop on my account, Queen Catherine said, settling onto the bench across from them. I was enjoying listening to the different voices. David looked up, suddenly realizing he was in the presence of the Queen Mother. He started to stand, but Queen Catherine waved him back down. Please continue the story, she said. Alexander has been looking forward to story time all week. So David kept reading, though Isabella could see he was now more aware of his audience. Queen Catherine listened quietly, watching David's interaction with her great-grandson with sharp, observant eyes. When the story ended, Alexander clapped his hands. That was the best dragon story ever. Can you read another one? Alex, darling, it's time for your afternoon rest, Queen Catherine said gently. But perhaps David could read to you again another time. Promise? Alexander asked David seriously. Promise, David said, and Isabella could tell he meant it. After Alexander skipped away toward the palace, the three of them sat in silence for a moment. Isabella felt like her future hung in the balance. Finally, Queen Catherine spoke. Isabella tells me you work in disaster relief. Yes, Your Majesty, David said respectfully. I coordinate aid efforts in areas affected by natural disasters and conflicts. And what drew you to that work? David thought carefully before answering. I grew up in a small town where everyone looked out for each other. When someone's house burned down, the whole community came together to help rebuild. I learned that helping others isn't just about charity. It's about recognizing that we're all connected. When I started traveling and saw how disasters could destroy entire communities, I wanted to bring that same spirit of mutual support to a larger scale. Queen Catherine nodded thoughtfully. Isabella also tells me that you didn't know about her identity when you first met. That's correct, David said. I fell in love with her character, her kindness, and her dedication to helping others. Her title doesn't change any of those things. But surely her position creates complications for you. David was quiet for a moment, then answered honestly. Yes, it does. The scrutiny, the protocol, the public attention, none of that comes naturally to me. But loving Isabella isn't complicated. That part is the easiest thing in the world. Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes at his simple, honest words. Queen Catherine stood up, and both Isabella and David rose as well. The older woman looked, at David for a long moment, and Isabella held her breath. "Young man," Queen Catherine said finally, "walk with me." Isabella started to follow, but her grandmother held up a hand. "Alone, please." Isabella watched nervously as her grandmother and the man she loved disappeared around a corner of the garden path. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours before they returned. When they came back, Queen Catherine was asking David about his ideas for preventing disasters through better infrastructure and community preparation. David was explaining his theories with enthusiasm, and Queen Catherine was listening with genuine interest. "Isabella," Queen Catherine said when they reached the bench again, "I believe you mentioned that you and David have some news to share with the family." Isabella's heart stopped. She and David had gotten married quietly the week before, with only Sophia and David's sister as witnesses. They had planned to tell the family gradually, starting with her parents and then working up to Queen Catherine. But somehow her grandmother already knew. "How did you—" Isabella started to ask. Queen Catherine smiled. "I've been alive for 85 years, dear. I notice when my granddaughter starts wearing a wedding ring on a chain around her neck instead of on her finger." Isabella unconsciously touched the spot where David's ring rested beneath her sweater, hidden from public view. "So," Queen Catherine continued, "when someone asks me who this young man is, what should I tell them?" Isabella looked at David, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. She thought about all the complicated explanations she could give about David's humanitarian work, his education, his family background, his character. Instead, she chose the simplest truth. "The human I married," Isabella said clearly. Queen Catherine's face broke into a smile, the first genuinely happy smile Isabella had seen from her in months. "Well then," the Queen Mother said, "I suppose we should start planning a proper reception so the rest of the family can meet him properly." That evening, as Isabella and David sat in their favorite spot by the fountain, Isabella felt lighter than she had in years. "Your grandmother is remarkable," David said. "She asked me about everything, my work, my family, my intentions with you, my thoughts on public service. But she also asked about my favorite books and whether I knew how to make pancakes." Isabella laughed. "Grandmother believes you can learn everything you need to know about a person by talking to them about ordinary things. What do you think she learned about me?" Isabella leaned against David's shoulder, feeling perfectly content. "That you're exactly the kind of person she hoped I would find. Someone who sees helping others as a privilege, not a burden. Someone who treats everyone with equal respect, whether they're a prince or a refugee. Someone who makes me laugh and makes me want to be better." 1 year later, Isabella and David were working together to run a foundation focused on disaster, prevention, and community resilience. Their love story had quietly changed the way the royal family approached relationships and public service, proving that the strongest foundations are built on authentic love and shared values.